Yo guys, what up, Viper here, and today I'm gonna give you a very advanced version of one of the strongest teams at the moment in the game. Super easy to play. It's gonna be literally 3 ranks, 3 elo until you're at least platinum or maybe diamond even. So let's get right into it. Okay, so the very obvious easy first thing everybody is seeing, well, no surprise, it's a Tsunami Enchanter team. Well, it is what it is. Tsunami Enchanter is the theme of the meta. There are 2 main versions. There is the version that is utilizing essentially 5 bulwarks and a very cheap and lean team for very early and mid-game power spikes, killing the opponent very quickly, which essentially this version is, but with a lot of adaptations towards which bulwarks you are playing. And then the other version is the one with Toxic Colossus Berserkers that is, well, kind of like strong throughout the entire game, but doesn't have like insane power spikes like this team has in some turns, and it doesn't really kill as quick as this team does as well. So those are the 2 main versions. I'm gonna show you guys this version today because I think the changes to the bulwarks and the adaptability and the options are incredibly good, and most people are not really prepared for this ever. So fundamentally speaking, when this team first came up, there was the very basic 8 Illuvial setup of the 3 water bulwarks, 2 air bulwarks, plus the double tsunami and cuculus, right? Now, the very obvious weakness of that were nature-based teams, mainly speaking nature Riplands and nature Phosphorus. So there were a bunch of people trying out different versions with 3 to 5 Earth and different early games and some rogues and so on and so on. I don't think any of that is really necessary, as the main thing that you are losing to, if you are losing to these Riplands or Phosphorus focused teams, is the nature dominant affinity that they have, because, well, they get a really quick hyper, and hyper on fighters gives attack speed and incredibly powerful resistance piercing. So it is a super strong counter to your 5 bulwark setup, which just leaves us to, instead of playing 2 air bulwarks, we can simply play 2 fire bulwarks. Flare and Fire Grocko, very cheap, very easy to play. Flare, super strong unit that also does a good amount of damage. And, well, 2 fire units counter the nature hyper in the early and mid stages. Even on turn 1, playing versus a nature Phosphorus or a nature Riplands that is likely going to come down on turn 2, instead of playing the triple water bulwark setup, you do go for the Fire Grocko, the Color Blue and the Atlas on turn 1, adapting versus the enemy's hyper. So that's the main idea. As long as the other side cannot get hyper, they don't have enough damage, they cannot push through your front line, and eventually your Ranger Gauntlet, your Enchanter pure damage will end up killing the enemy team, while you do sustain with the Enchanter shields and the Flood healing output. Now, in the same sense, people were trying to counter your water-air setup with air, because air counters water pretty heavily, so people were playing 3, 5, even 7 air teams, and, well, nature is countering air. So the idea is that, again, on turn 1, instead of playing the water Grocko, you just put down a nature Grocko, the enemy team doesn't get a super easy and quick hyper, and then later on in the game you can play for a 2 or 3 nature bulwarks even. Especially because Heli and Kling both are very high valuable units, honestly. Kling with the ability to crowd control the 2 furthest enemies, very hard to dodge for the enemy carries. And Heli very good against most aggressive teams, as Heli's ability is a cloud for 4 seconds in the medium area around itself, and allies in it take less damage, and enemies auto-attacking into that cloud are blinded. So it beats auto-attack based teams like fighter, air kind of things very heavily, and it is a overall damage reduction if your opponent is playing also some like Gauntlet, Enchanter, Psion based things. So way higher valuable units than running, well, Grokkos basically, right? Also more valuable than Atlas or Cara Blue, because, well, they have essentially crowd control and damage reduction abilities, while Atlas is just a shield. Cara Blue Taunt is very powerful, but very low range, so a bit lackluster, especially in the later stages of the games, while though obviously the super cheap water bulwark setup is very good in the early stages of the game. Now, having this variety of bulwarks also allows you that later on in the game you don't necessarily have to sit on the 3 water bulwarks, and you can either put in, for example, air plus nature, air plus fire, or maybe even nature plus fire. Well, nature plus fire a bit more difficult, because then you would have to drop excellent cuculus or flood, so I wouldn't really advise for that. That's a bit too fancy. But yeah, fundamentally speaking, late game oftentimes is gonna be just a 2 air for the initial energy increase on the first Omega that your opponent wants to cast. Very, very powerful in combination with a Techno Leech and Biogenic Suppressors later on in the game when you have all those augments online. Or you just, well, have like the setup of a 3 nature and 2 fire to counter opponent's hypers. You have a 3 nature 2 water, 3 nature 2 air, 3 fire to water, 3 fire to nature, just whatever is good versus the hyper that your opponent is playing, which makes this a little less straightforward to play, I know, but it is still fundamentally relatively easy to play because you're playing a 5 Bulwark Ranger carry based Enchanter team. I think most of you guys have a lot of experience playing this or playing against this already, so I suggest trying this out if you are looking for something that is able to win almost every single matchup that you can face on ladder, because there isn't really a hard counter to this. It is just a very cheap, very lean team that does a lot of damage due to Enchanter and the Ranger Gauntlet. Now a quick jump into the augments, because playing 14 Illuvials we don't have as many augments anymore in this current version, because the scary teams to face up against are more the energy based teams, they're less the auto attack based teams. So you have triple Techno Leecher, triple Biogenic Suppressor, the best anti-energy augments. You usually want to go double Techno Leecher on your Exodon, and the third Techno Leecher, depending on what you have, it can be on an Atlas or a Lynx or a Flood. Just like whatever is kind of like in a good position, and a 3 with an augment slot to have, preferably, especially on the 20 cost one. If you play a mirror-ish matchup, you just want to give it the first Illuvial that with the current positioning in the fight casts the first ability. That is the main important thing, because if you get to trigger this before your opponent gets to trigger any Techno Leechers, that usually means that your Axon is going to be the first to trigger the double Techno Leecher, which puts you super far ahead in this like Techno Leecher energy counter based mirror matchup. Then outside of that, increasing your own energy, very much a staple augment, right? Our team gets 15 extra energy. The cool thing here is if we check, for example, our Ranger weapon. Ranger weapon starting energy is 82, and the energy cost for ability is 118. So you need 36 energy to cast the first ability. Now the Ranger suit gives you 16 initial energy, and this gives you 20 initial energy. So if your opponent doesn't have the air affinity in play, and you play this one single 40 cost augment, your Ranger will start the fight with an ability, immediately triggering the Enchanter proc for damage and for shields, and immediately activating Tsunami, and super fast starting the cycle of more and more abilities. Very powerful. Outside of that, the second field mainly there if you have these Techno Leecher mirrors, so that your Flood and your Exodon can start casting abilities as quick as possible. Same for your Cuculus, Enchanter proc, just a lot of damage up front. And then, well, Indomitable Augment, very good versus teams that are just a lot of auto attack damage, a lot of single target damage. Very good versus things like Arcanite or Berserkers. And then in matchups where you're not super heavy focused on denying the opponent energy gain, when they play, for example, Berserkers, or when they play just like auto attack based teams, fighter based teams, things like that, then you can make your Axon into a super big tank running these 2 tank augments. Just essentially choose resistance here for the immediate one at the beginning of the combat, and you can choose scaling resistance here as well. So Exodon just keeps being tankier and tankier throughout the combat. Healing option can also be considered, kind of just depends on the matchup and how things are going. Is your opponent having a lot of resistance piercing things like pure damage? Do they have resistance shred abilities, and so on and so on. But yeah, the safe standard option is scaling resistance and upfront resistance here. Now the 2 augments that you guys might be thinking about that are missing, that would be more or less standard when you see this, are the photogenic ones. We check here. Now, this is really good if you play a energy versus energy based matchup, but because we have so many Illuvials to try to cover the matchup, so there's no insta-lose matchup really anymore. That's why this is a very non-polarizing team. You're essentially flattening out. You're not as super hardcore favored versus some matchups anymore, but you're also not super hardcore unfavored versus anything really, because you can counter the hyper with the extra Illuvials. You can certainly, for example, remove the nature Illuvials. I would never remove the fire Illuvials, because nature is your biggest issue. So I would always want to keep 2 to 3 fire Illuvials. But yeah, if you don't face many air Illuvials, you can cut the nature Illuvials and you can start putting in, for example, Photonic Unity for more energy and Omega power. This augment, it sounds cool, a little bit of energy, a little bit of Omega power, but if you like calculate it in your head, it's really not that much. So it's a very, very late game augment to go for, and it's more for a mirror match with Technoleech and biogenic suppressors involved. Furthermore, something like the Exalted Temporal Safeguard on the both either Cleanse Immune or Damage Reduction are very viable options for your Axolon if you want to make Axolon a super tank. But this is less universally useful than the Endurance Matrix, which is always just a tank augment I can give anybody, really. That's why I currently, in my more, I don't know, less polarizing list, less polarizing version of the team, I prefer to have this over the Safeguard. And yeah, if you want to play more augments, Siphon Matrix, always a decent augment. The Invulnerable at the start of combat augment, very, very viable. You can even think about things like giving one Parasitic Link to your Ranger. If your opponent has some damage that can come to your Ranger, you can just give this to the Flood. 2 nearest allies gain 16 Omnivamp, give it to your Ranger, and as long as your Ranger doesn't get a one-shot, they usually just heal up with one of their powerful abilities. And I guess short rundown on the normal turns, right? The normal turns is you play some Atlas, Kara Blue plus 1 Grokko that counters the enemy team. Then turn 2, you just do Cuculus, Flood, you bond your Ranger weapon to the Flood for Tsunami Enchanter. And turn 3, well, turn 3 depends a bit, but there are different standard lines. For example, if you are versus something where you want to play Fire Bulwarks, you can just do Grokko Flare, equip a Ranger suit. That is 110 points on the 120 coin turn. You can play, for example, Kling and Hedy and the Ranger suit. And if you started the game with Atlas, Kara Blue, and Nature Grokko, you then would have 3 Nature, 5 Bulwark, equip the Ranger suit again. Very, very clean and strong turn. Super good frontline if Nature is very good against air-based teams, for example. Or you could also consider just full upgrading your Ranger weapon on that turn. You can consider playing Axolon and a big Ranger weapon and so on. I would suggest you experiment a bit with that depending on the matchups that you are facing, because there is no really clear answer outside of that. Well, if you are playing with a bunch of air Illuvials, you want to play the normal turn 1, Atlas, Kara Blue plus a Grokko, turn 2, Cuculus Flood, turn 3, then either 2 Fire or 2 Nature Illuvials, depending on, well, if they counter the opponent. And if you need neither Nature nor Fire, if you just want to play air and water Illuvials, then you can consider options like Axolon, upgrading Ranger weapon, going Lynx and Grokko and such as well. I would really suggest, though, by turn 4, you should always have your fully upgraded Ranger weapon in play, and preferably also have your suit equipped and your Axolon plate. Those are very, very key things. You want to have 3 Tsunami and full upgraded Ranger weapon on turn 4, no matter really what you do on turn 3 and 4, depending on which sequence you go for those things. Very, very important. It is your main damage output. You need to get that out. So here, this is one of the recent games that I played on stream. I'm streaming pretty much every single day on Twitch in like the European afternoon to evening night times. So yeah, if you want to go check live gameplay out, live stream gameplay out, go there. You can pretty much find me every single day. And let's get into this as one of the recent games. Now we are facing a 7 Fire team, which I've seen a few times in the recent days. Very surprising that this popped up again. I didn't really think it's, I don't know, that much of a good meta thing or such, because, well, we had seen a lot of Earth recently, but I guess the Earth things are kind of gone because the Enchanter teams have adapted and they don't really lose to Earth, and barely anybody is playing Arcanite, and Earth was mainly meant to counter Arcanite. So Fire is making a comeback here, it seems. And yeah, as you can see, it's pretty much a super hyper damage focused team. All the Ram Fight and Ram Fire versions in there, and then it is essentially Psion and Bulwark based, using the strong Fire Bulwarks like Flare and the strong, well, Fire Psions like just like Ember Nynxes and Flishes. Okay. So legendary augment thing, I think this is, well, from my perspective, I'm like, okay, I'm scared of both of these. They're both very good. I can use Entropy better than Omnisource, so I'm going to triple bet the Entropy one, and I get the Entropy one. My opponent just wanted to get one or the other. Now you can see turn 1, well, because I'm playing against a full fire team, I can just go for full water. I don't really know what the turn 1 of my enemy is here. It might involve a Ramp, it might involve something else. So we play around a rogue, placing 1 bulwark in the back and 2 bulwarks in the front. Color blue usually the best disruptive bulwark just due to the taunt ability and it having better tank stats than, for example, a small Grocco. Now, turn 1, we managed to kill the enemy Grocco, but besides that, I don't think there's much you can do. You can just hope for killing those 25 points, mitigating some damage. Don't think you can very much beat 4 fire to rogue with these high quality early game units that my opponent has here. Now on turn 2, well, we just did the standard turn 1. There are options of, like, this is more or less advanced gameplay idea here, where you just go some 5 bulwark setup instead of the usual flat Cuculus setup. I would advise play around this if you are versus, I don't know, things where you don't really know how it's gonna go, where you feel like you know for a fact that flat Cuculus is really, really bad, flat Cuculus won't accomplish much, then just, well, try to experiment, try to deviate, and go for some 5 bulwark setups, for example. Now, here in this example, you can see I did decide to go for the 5 bulwark setup. Why? Because I'm facing versus Ramfire, Ramfight, and Ramfi, and a Psion-based team, so their Omega abilities are very, very strong and very, very scary. So I probably want to get my air Illuvials in anyways, just to delay those very, very big impactful casts. And before they can cast, I can just kill a couple small units. That is my goal here. I'm not really expecting to be able to win these rounds. I'm playing versus super, super strong early game oriented thing here. And it is looking decent. It looks like I can kill a lot of things. I can deal a lot of damage here. So I'm pretty happy with the outcome of this round. We barely take any damage. There's only 2 small ranged guys and the ranger surviving. While now a bit more on the logic why flat Cuculus is not that good in this setup. If you only have 3 small bulwarks and the entire enemy team is super damage oriented, those bulwarks will probably die before you can get a lot of value from Enchanter shields or flat healing, because flat healing takes a lot of time until it starts to get going. And yeah, if your bulwarks are dead, they can't be healed, they can't be shielded, the shields can't do any damage. So that is not that strong. That is why the 5 bulwark option on turn 2 can be just a higher power spike, because something like a Lynx also does a really good amount of damage. Now here we, well, go for the Cuculus, go for the Flood, go for the combo for Enchanter. And the question that's really interesting, well, I have 30 points left, what do I do with that now? Here I do have a very strong Legendary Augment, so going for the Legendary Augment makes a lot of sense. And yeah, positioning wise, we don't really want to position into the enemy Ramfi. There's a high chance that a Ramfire or something else might come down here this turn as well. So we just position to the left side. Now, I wanted to showcase this game because this is a really, I don't know, we could say a stupid mistake, we could say a beginner mistake that I made here that I didn't really think about, because, well, if you're streaming, you are talking to chat and there's a lot of other things happening. But yeah, you could see here, this is really, really interesting, because this might happen. This is like, on one hand, the standard defensive positioning you do versus rogues, because the rogues are very big, or like slightly too big to walk here or here, so no one can auto attack your ranger if it's in this corner behind Flood, but your ranger also can't walk out. So my opponent having the entire team on this side means my ranger can't walk out, my ranger can't auto attack anything. That is essentially a pretty bad misplay in this turn here, but if there would be any Illuvials here and rogues would be jumping here, it would be really good. So this is a super, I mean, it's not super advanced, but it's kind of an advanced play for this team or against this team, where, well, you can block your ranger in this corner and it's super safe versus rogues, because they have to go through the Flood first or maybe through other bulwarks first, and only then can they get to the ranger. But if there's nothing to auto attack, your ranger can't walk out and your ranger can't play the game. So this is, well, this turn obviously it's a misplay. There's no rogue that's 100% jumping my ranger. If there's a rogue jumping my ranger can just auto attack that rogue and everything is fine and good. So if I would be positioning on this side with the Ramfi, I should be doing this. Playing on the opposing side, I should not be doing this turn. But for my opponent maybe swapping positioning, you should still check the positioning like this and then move the ranger out. Just move the ranger behind the Lynx and the Cuculus. as a safe spot for this turn, and in the future you always have the option to move your ranger here. This is, by the way, the same against gorillas and mud mystic teams, where the enemy gorilla, like no matter which stage it is, it can cast on the ranger, it can deal damage to the ranger, but it cannot auto attack the ranger if it is positioned like this, because the gorilla doesn't have space to walk up and auto attack. It always is going to be stuck here or here, and it's always only going to be attacking your flood. So this is super insane counterplay versus the mud mystic teams using gorilla and predator. But if they are like very smart, which honestly very few people are, this is pretty advanced thing, they could just play the entire team on the back line on the opposing side of your team, and maybe your ranger is stuck and can't auto attack anything. The way that you can counterplay that is if you don't frontline anything, if you just play your entire team on the back line on the same side of the ranger, and then they kind of just meet in the middle and you can auto attack. So it's a bit of an advanced thing there, but I think it's a good thing to highlight, because, well, it happened to me this game, I wasn't paying attention. And yeah, we can see the fight starts. Opponent is not playing a Ramfire like I initially thought. I thought there would be a Ramfire coming down here, my ranger could attack it, but it's just more tanks and they're too far away, my ranger can't play the game. Now we can fast forward here a bit. If my ranger could have played the game, probably would have won this round or very close loss, but because my ranger could not play the game, we take a pretty big hit here, making the game become a bit close. So yeah, that is something you can certainly optimize. But then again, even here, we see our ranger was AFK most of this fight, and we only lose to half of the enemy team. So probably is going to be a win if you just play the ranger here better, and you would follow the same idea. Legendary augment betting, there's nothing interesting happening here. Now this turn we kind of deviated a bit on the initial ideas, so we can't really do ranger, excellent and full weapon upgrade, because there's a legendary augment on the Cuculus. Also the air links is usually pretty expensive, so you don't really always play it on turn 3 or turn 4. Sometimes the air setup only comes in on turn 5 after you already have fully upgraded your ranger items and so on. But yeah, here the 5 Bulwarks on turn 2, they were very good for mitigating damage. So we still prioritize Ranger Weapon 100% and Exodon 100% this turn. And then you see how much points you have left. In this case, there was just a Biogenic Suppressor left, which is one of the top augments against energy-based teams. Our opponent playing a Ramfire, Ramfight-based team plus Psion. So counter energy, very powerful there. And yeah, our Ranger, very safe position here as well. There's a tanky unit in the back. There are rogues on this side with my bulwarks in the back. I do try to predict a Ramfire coming down to the left side here. That's why I move my Cara Blue, just to be safe, because if all the rogues move over, they can very easily kill my flood. Plus the enemy Flish would aim into the flood, very scary. And yeah, you do want to protect your flood. The flood healing is pretty crucial to your team, very strong. But yeah, here, as you can see, now we have the initial Enchanter procs, which is very good for killing the enemy's bulwarks. And yeah, just a normal game where my ranger can now attack and deal damage. And yeah, you guys can see we are kind of just pushing through the fire team. Flood is starting to get healing in, Exodon is getting shields in, and we are just surviving, basically. Turn 4, not the strongest turn, just a Ramfire with no augments for the enemy team as well. So very big power spike turn for us, essentially. We have air in, we have water in, we have 5 bulwarks and Enchanter and the upgraded ranger weapon, plus a small energy counter augment versus the super energy based team, if you think about it. Fiery Psion unit, Lynx, Flish Psion units, Ramfire, Ramfight, very Omega ability based units. Now in the next turn, the basic thing always is equipping our Ranger suit and then, well, play against an energy-based team. So we play more anti-energy augments. Usually you want to play the Biogenic Suppressors first, and then you want to play Techno Leechers. Now here's the question, is it a Techno Leecher or is it a team against energy augment? I like the 1 team against 20 energy augment a lot, because that makes your Ranger instantly cast the first ability, instantly getting the first shield, the first damage proc, and also it is not as easy for your opponent to predict where the Ranger ability goes at the beginning of the fight, because their melee Illuvials haven't started moving yet and so on. So this can be very surprising. On a positioning note here, I moved my Ranger away from behind my Exodon, because the Arcane Embodings could have been moved over here. It could target the Exodon and then it could snipe into Exodon and my Ranger. So you can utilize the free movement of your Ranger every turn, just to kind of prevent your opponent doing some cheesy positioning switch things. Now here you can see again, Ramfire got casts off and so on. Very, very aggressive augments, but because we just have the quick Enchanter shields and the quick burst damage from the super, super fast casting here, well, our units did manage to survive mainly, and we also did just output a lot of upfront damage, just killing the very low defense enemy team. 7 fire, 3 bulwark, rest is full damage. Very easy to kill that. And now, turn 6, almost the last turn that you have really, really strong plays to do, because we play this very lean, low augment heavy team. So yeah, just going for the last augments, full anti-energy on Axelon, Tsunami, Techno-Leecher, insane combination, because Techno-Leecher takes more energy away from the enemy team the more energy you spend for your ability. Tsunami refunds a good portion of the ability, and Axelon has very high starting energy as well. So Axelon's first ability comes in super quick, super heavily debuffing the enemy team. And that is a kind of the story why this is so strong. Now, one really relevant thing with this team on especially turn 5 and 6 is because your team is so lean and essentially cheap, and you don't preferably want to play late game, you are power spiking in the early to mid game stages, you're super strong, you want to close out games, you don't want to play until turn 7, 8, 9 usually. Adjusting your positioning can be super meaningful. Now here in this matchup, there's not much to adjust or to adjust for, to be honest, but if you play versus like melee, berserker, fighter heavy matchups, for example, it makes a lot of sense to adjust positioning. Now here, there's a ram fight coming in on the left side. They're focusing the flood, which is what I said I am afraid about earlier. And you can see the enemy ranger is probably going to kill my flood. Very scary. And the enemy ram fight with Indomitable and the other thing did manage to pretty much one-shot my ranger. So very scary here, but it took my opponent so long to get the cast and the one-shot on that off that we managed to kill pretty much all of the rest of the enemy team. Then again, the ranger there, very scary. And yeah, we do closely lose this round. So now turn 7, main thing you can do, adjusting positioning. Now this is a bit of a difficult spot at this point, because your opponent is also very much aware that you probably will adjust positioning, right? So you're kind of 50-50ing the blind positioning here, what you're gonna do, what are they gonna do, but you can certainly play around very well, play around the enemy rogues and similar very well. Now the other thing here is, because you have so many points left, you can also adjust your team composition. So here, what you can see is, for example, the enemy ranger is an Inferno unit and very scary, but it's still a very squishy Phantom Psion Inferno unit. So having a Grocko, for example, here that can stun and disrupt this ranger and gets Enchanter shields for more damage and so on, that is very annoying and problematic for the enemy ranger. So if you play with these Ramfire based teams, just having a Grocko, so having small bulwarks in both corners of the map is very powerful against them. Then furthermore, because the enemy team is so low on defenses, swapping out the water bulwarks for fire bulwarks is pretty meaningful here, because Atlas is kind of useless, honestly. It just gets a shield to itself. That doesn't really matter anymore at this point in the game. Kara Blue Taunt can be really clutch, but it is still 2 seconds. It's kind of like a small, not so tanky unit. If we think about, well, Flare does a tremendous amount of AoE damage. The Fire Emberlings, Stoic Emberlings, does a tremendous amount of damage on the ability, and with the Thorns kind of effect that it gets afterwards. And also Fire Grocko just does more damage than Water Grocko. Water Grocko having a bit of energy utility, but simply speaking, you saw how the last fight went. Even though my ranger got executed by the ram fight ability, basically just got annihilated by that, the rest of my team kind of managed to survive and pull through and kill the fire team, because the fire team is so low on defense that just my tanks are doing enough damage, and it's not even only about my ranger surviving. Therefore, just having more damage, having more upfront power onto the enemy team, very good. So I think that fire in the late game stage here, for example, can outperform water, because the small energy region part that water gives you is not that relevant. Also, the water Illuvials are just lower quality than Flare and the Emberlings. Also, you can see overall adjusted positioning so that the Flood is not really as much in danger of getting focused by the rogues, and the Flood can get like 1 or 2 healing things off. It's usually pretty chill. Now here, me side swapping, dodge the Invulnerable and Cypher Matrix here, that is very, very powerful for me. And yeah, outside of that, we just super quickly killed the enemy frontline here. No big Ramfires could cast. Killed the Ramfire before it could even cast because Kukulos had the legendary energy gain augment. But even if the Ramfire would have cast, it probably would not have been enough to kill my team here. So, well, pretty easy win in the end, because the super energy based team essentially just got countered by us having all these energy counter augments and having a lot of freedom in being able to move and adjust the team later on. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I think I went pretty in depth. I hope that wasn't very boring, but I feel like this is genuinely gonna help you climb super easily until we're gonna have a patch. I don't know when a patch is gonna happen. I personally hope soon. I'm not too happy with Tsunami Enchanter meta, but hey, if you wanna play the game, if you wanna improve your rank, it's a very good thing to do. Also, the Illuvium creator reward program kind of thingy has started. So I mean, if you're watching this and you're in Illuvium, you probably know about this, right? But I don't know, still click the ref link, check out I don't know, check out the website and whatever. If you, this is like one of the first videos that you're watching, 100% please use my link to that. And yeah, I don't know, it's a good way of supporting me without really having to do anything. I'm very interested how this creator program thing is going to work out for Illuvium. Very interested if this is going to bring in new creators and new content to the ecosystem, or yeah, I don't know what else is going to happen. Appreciate everybody that made it to the end of the video. Live streaming on Twitch pretty much every day. See you guys over there, and in the next video. Bye bye.